the future of humanity depends on mothers having children. Why don't we think more about that? Simple things like you can book your bike onto a train, but you can't book your buggy onto a train.
We're really excited about who's joining us today, aren't we, Bob?
We have Chine McDonald. So Chine is the author of God is Not a White Man and the brand spanking new Unmaking Mary, Shattering the Myth of Perfect Motherhood.
Mary, she is not just a mother, she is also a prophetic figure. Did Mary have pregnancy sickness like I did throughout in the 9 months?
I've even heard of a philosophical movement where they want to stop anyone having children so that humans can die out altogether.
We are more than just bodies, that we are also spiritual beings. The divine, being feminine in some way.
God likens himself to a breastfeeding mother.
I think this idea that calling God she is some kind of woke, like 21st century idea is obviously false. No one surely really thinks God is a man.
Hello and welcome back to Re-Enchanting. I'm Justin Brierley.
And I'm Belle Tindall.
And this is the show where we aim to re-enchant a largely secular material world with the Christian vision of reality. And we're really excited about who's joining us today, aren't we, Belle?
We are so excited, isn't even the word.
No.
More than that, we have Chine McDonald,
Woohoo!
who, of course...
She deserves a woohoo
She does.
because she's our first returning guest.
Yes, you are our first returning guest. This is our first sequel.
This is an
There you go.
absolute honour.
Yeah.
Can I
Perhaps
say?
the honour of my
We
life.
We reserved it for you.
I should think so.
Chine.
But for anyone who hasn't seen your part one, in which case I'm sure they will do so straight after they've listened to this episode, let me introduce you. So Chine is the director of Theos, the religion and society think tank. She's also a regular contributor to TV and radio programmes and is the author of God is Not a White Man and Other Revelations and the brand spanking new Unmaking Mary, Shattering the Myth of Perfect Motherhood.
Yeah, we're going to talk about the new book, obviously, but we talk about books in all kinds of ways on this show because we film here at Lambeth Palace Library. As you'll know from last time, our first question is always, what are you currently reading? I assume something different to what you were reading a year and a half ago when we last spoke to you.
No, I'm a really slow reader. I'm sure lots of guests say this, but I've got so many books on the go because I want to read all the books all the time. So I am currently reading The Afternoon of Christianity by Thomas Hallich, who's a kind of Catholic priest, former Templeton Prize winner. And it's all about he has this idea about us being in basically the middle bit of Christianity and how we need to adapt and change to the environment that we're in. And it's really profound and beautiful and creative and prophetic.
When he says in the middle bit of Christianity, that's interesting. As in, he senses that there's still a long way to go before, I don't know, the return of Christ or something like that. Is that what
yes. And almost it's the afternoon, but also kind of the middle age. How do you kind of evolve, change, to kind of meet the changing environment that we're in? But also a couple of fiction books I'm reading. I find I'm reading much slower than non-fiction. But Dream Count by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, who is my absolute favourite author, Nigerian author, and it's about a group of women, Nigerian women, in different places around the world, and their encounters with kind of love and life, and it's also kind of written kind of through the pandemic as well. Also, Sally Rooney's Intermezzo, trying to get through that.
Oh, I knew, because when I was reading your book, it was just full of all my favourite authors. And so I was like, I can't wait to hear what Chine's reading now, because I bet I love both things. And both of those novels, have been two of my 2025 books.
I haven't read any Sally Rooney yet, to my shame, but I keep hearing the name and people recommending it. And I was on holiday with someone who was reading a book of hers. And I feel like if she's listening by any strange coincidence,
that would be fun.
She would be a fantastic guest probably for Re-Enchanting.
Yes.
So, yeah, okay.
Rooney. You will have to fight Chine.
Officially invited.
Yes, okay. So your book, because there's also a podcast which in so many ways sits alongside it, but if we go for book first. Your book, the big old title is Unmaking Mary. I love how unafraid you are of big, bold titles for your books. So if you could talk us through that title, but what I'm really interested in is, and really what your whole book is about, is who was Mary for you before you started writing this book, and who is she to you now that you've unmade her?
Yeah, it does feel like a bold claim when you say that I've unmade her, but I guess I was raised in the evangelical church, and honestly, I didn't really think much about Mary at all for most of my Christian life. I heard about her at Christmas, and often what I heard about Mary was this one story, which was that basically she did as she was told. She consented. Her fiat, it's described as. So what that told me was women should do as they're told. So I didn't really think much about her at all. And I think that happens a lot in the Protestant church. We don't really think about Mary as the Mother of God. And I guess she could also be described, what I've realised is that she is the most famous mother of all. When we talk about imagery and ideas about motherhood, the maternal, it is Mary that basically depicts that in a lot of Western European art. No matter where in the world that you might be, it is Mary who is the idea about motherhood. And I realised, particularly since becoming a mother myself, I've been a mum for 7.5 years now, and I had read a lot of secular motherhood books about the institution of motherhood. So some kind of feminist motherhood books like Adrienne Rich's of Woman Born, Lucy Jones's Matrescence. And all of these secular writers, they at some point talk about Mary as this passive receptacle. Lucy Jones describes her as a prop, a dummy, onto which all of the kind of ideas about what a mother should be are projected. And I noticed something in that. What did it tell us about how Christianity has actually seeped through our culture in a way that a lot of people don't take notice of? But it also told me that there was a kind of very one-dimensional idea about Mary, who she was, and what she said about mothers. So most people, when they think about Mary, they might imagine the Mary that we see in European art galleries or on Christmas cards. She is often looking very serenely, dotingly at her child. She's often got her head tilted. She's kind of looking kind of small. She is looking passive. She's also always beautiful, and she's always white, and she's always young. And so this kind of very one-dimensional view of who Mary is, and in turn what motherhood is the thing that I try to unmake, because I think actually I've realised that Mary is much more interesting than that, and motherhood is much more textured than that. So that's the bit that I kind of unmake, try to.
I suppose, obviously, you know, having grown up in that more evangelical church environment where there was sort of Mary just kind of got wheeled out once a year. There's a very different sort of obviously approach to Mary in a Catholic or Eastern Orthodox, you know, environment where she's far more front and centre. But do you equally have concerns with the way Mary is sort of profiled in that kind of environment as well?
Yeah, I have different concerns. I think my concerns there are kind of more theological, I guess, in terms of the kind of almost implied divinity and perfection and holiness of Mary. Yes, I think she was holy and good and the mother of God. And I think that those Catholic churches and Orthodox churches, they do something that my Protestant upbringing didn't, which was they had a woman.
I was going to say that at least is arguably a difference, that people who complain that Christianity perhaps is too patriarchal in various ways, at least within those traditions, there is a very feminine figure, albeit, you know, with the, you know, problems that you have theologically with exactly how that's expressed. But there is at least an attempt to give God a feminine face at one level. I don't know.
And this radical idea that God would be born of a woman, I think is really beautiful. But what's interesting is it doesn't necessarily then lead to, in those traditions, kind of women in leadership or anything like that. So she has a very particular place, and there's been lots and lots written about, I guess this female icon and what men in particular, the male psyche sees in that and needs from that. So I guess I'm a little bit uncomfortable with this idea that actually in some ways we reinforce these constructed boxes of feminine and masculine, and almost there is this idea of God being this kind of angry, severe male figure, and therefore you need a kind of nice mummy to talk to get to God. I think we need to change our ideas of who God is if that is the case.
That's something that I was writing about just this week, and then I got the joy of reading your book this week, and I was like, Jenny's written this so much better than I could. But you speak about this idea, and it's very Julian of Norwich. I think St. Anselm also spoke about it. Amy Peeler has written a book all about it, about God being mother, and how that shouldn't ick us out, that thought, because actually it's so biblical, and what I was writing about, which I really found, was in these sort of pieces of Bible. So in Isaiah, in Deuteronomy, it's quite bodily, it's quite tangible. In Isaiah, God likens himself to a breastfeeding mother. So it's honoring the most tangible, the most, what we might say is kind of mundane aspects of motherhood, the unseen, the day in, the day out, the non-glamorous. God's like, that's as, in this moment, that's as close to my character as I can point you.
That is, exactly. And that's what I have rediscovered in looking at Mary in particular. It's not actually just about Mary, and it's not just about motherhood. It's actually about who I believe and understand God to be, or what God is like. So I get a completely different and really beautiful understanding of who I believe God is when I think about God as mother, because I guess there is in culture and in the church this idea that a mother's love is like endless, like a mother is the one that cares for you, that nurtures you, that you can go to, this idea of mothers in our culture helps me understand who I think God is more.
It's always tricky territory though, isn't it? Because whenever something does enter the news about a priest, I think there was an Oxford chaplain a couple of years ago who used the word she for God in some context, and everyone got triggered, or certain people got triggered by that. It does tend to kind of be something that is still controversial, the idea of referring to God outside of the traditional use of he. So where's that coming from, do you think, in terms of when occasionally people do cross that line?
It's coming from a patriarchal culture. And I think this is where Unmaking Mary leads on from my last book, God is Not a White Man, because actually it wasn't just about race, it was also about gender. I think this idea that calling God she or God mother is some kind of woke, like 21st century idea is obviously false. 14th century mystics like Julian Norwich spoke about God as mother, Jesus as nursing us. These aren't new ideas. They're also biblical, as we've just spoken about. They're found in Scripture itself. No one surely really thinks God is a man. Right. Yes, God is father, but God is also mother. And I think we can get a much more holistic understanding of who God is and who we are as well from those kinds of realizations. I think also there are some really kind of profound theological insights I got in thinking about Mary as a mother who gives birth, who nurses, and thinking about the beauty of what it is to be human, the fact that we all were born and that we all came from someone else, that we're all fed and cared for and nurtured by another person. That idea of interdependence, the fact that we need each other, the idea of the Eucharist, the idea that we feed from the body and drink from the blood of Christ. Is like, it takes on a different idea when you understand. When I went through being pregnant and realizing that my child was basically part of me, but also distinct from me and feeding from me. These are really kind of bodily, embodied ideas. And yeah, another one of the myths that I try to unmake is this idea that Mary in her motherhood was disembodied somehow, that she lots of kind of interesting and weird ideas about Mary's birth experience, for example, in the kind of some Catholic traditions, these ideas that, she was pregnant and then all of a sudden Jesus was out. There was a flash of light and it was painless.
Somehow bypassed all the normal processes that are involved.
Yeah. It really helps us, doesn't it, to think about what we consider to be holy, I think. But there's this Advent devotional that I like doing, and one of the very first devotionals when it says something along the lines of, there was a point in history when the only evidence of the coming of Jesus was Mary's nausea. And it's thinking about so is that not holy? Is morning sickness not holy? Is swollen ankles and breastfeeding and pain and are those things not a part of the sacred rhythms of life?
Well, for much of the past few centuries, that has been the thought, that actually the reason why there is pain in childbirth is because of the sin of Eve. So it is all, it's not good in any way. But I do wonder in the book, did Mary have pregnancy sickness like I did throughout in the 9 months? Did she have swollen ankles? Did she have dodgy hips? Did she kind of not like the smell of things? Of course she did. She must have, surely, for us to really understand what incarnation is. If Jesus was truly human as well as God, then surely all of the human bits accompanied him.
So you do a lot of sort of myth busting around Mary herself in the book, but also around the whole concept of motherhood. What are some of the kind of key myths that you're addressing? And I mean, if there's one particular one that you would sort of hold up as an important one to think about.
The key myth is this idea of perfection. And that plays out in many different ways. The idea of a perfect body, the idea of a beautiful body being a particular skin color, the idea of the standards that mothers feel like they need to live up to. So that's what I find in some of the depictions of Mary, both in kind of art and culture, but also theologies over the centuries. This idea that she was perfect, the person that all mothers and all women should emulate, and that perfection did not have any pain. It was didn't have any anxiety. So one of the stories that I love most in the Bible now is when Jesus gets lost at the temple. Mary and Joseph are off, and then 3 days later they're like, where's
I've always thought
Jesus?
Maybe it's a cultural thing, but if you kind of haven't seen your kid for a few days, you might be like, but I guess there was maybe a culture where, hey, they were just traveling elsewhere with their other contemporaries.
It must have been different. But they find him at the temple, and in the account, Mary's like, well, where have you been? Didn't you know that we'd be worried about you? And he says, well, didn't you know I'd be in my father's house, which is a different, I can imagine my 7-year-old saying that, but
I can imagine you not being very impressed if they came back with that sort of retort as well.
But some theologians have tried to explain that away, explain Mary's anxiety away, because anxiety and worry is obviously not perfect. So all sorts of kind of contortions to try and kind of explain that away. So that is what I tried to get at, which is, if Mary was the mother of God, then she was a mother like other mothers. And that might have included lots of worry. Also, the fact that kind of the profound heartbreak of the fact that she watched her son die. And that to me is where Mary becomes not a symbol of kind of this perfection, but actually Mary as this icon who stands in solidarity with all mothers who experience loss, and that's loss at any point, including miscarriage, infertility, but also those mothers whose children have died. And I also see her as a kind of liberating figure, and that's where she becomes her Magnificat, which is Mary's song, where she talks about and sings about the mighty being cast down from their thrones. Mary there is often depicted, is depicted without the baby, because it happens before she is a mother. So this idea that she is not just a mother, she is also a prophetic figure. She is also a leader in the Jesus movement after her son has died. So it kind of breaks open Mary for me, beyond this kind of one-dimensional idea of
another
motherhood.
story that I've always found quite interesting, and I wonder what you make of it, Chine, where Jesus has begun his ministry, but then his family come to him and say, you know, what's going on? And he sort of says that thing about, these are my brothers and sisters around me. But you do get that sense that obviously there were tensions going on even at the time Jesus was in his ministry. Like Mary and the rest of the family may be wondering, is this going, has he gone off his rocker? What's going on? He's kind of making all these crazy claims now. I mean, does that kind of figure in your sort of thoughts about Mary?
I love little stories like that in the Bible, because they are not presenting this kind of perfect image of family life. There are sometimes tensions. There are sometimes things that we don't understand about people who are from the same family as us. I also think that there is another story in the Bible where a woman says to Jesus, blessed is the breast that kind of fed you. And he's like, blessed is it's not just about being a mother, that where the blessing comes. And that to me speaks into this idea for me that Mary beyond her motherhood is a symbol for all women and all people. This idea that motherhood is the ideal for women and the only way in which a woman is basically fulfilled, I think is also false.
Yeah. Well, this is what's really interesting. Yeah, that leads me perfectly to where my brain was going, because this is what I find interesting about motherhood is it's like this dualism, the way it's such a contrast, because on one hand you have people saying this is the highest calling a woman could ever give her life to. This is the most noble thing. This is the made it moment, becoming a mother. And it's really like celebrated and championed but then on the other side, you also have a real lack of respect for what being a mother entails, and actually you want it all to happen in private, and particularly in like feminist conversations it can be so sticky. And I remember as I was scrolling through Instagram one day, I scrolled past a clip of Mary Harrington, who writes and speaks a lot on motherhood, and she was talking about Greta Gerwig's Barbie film, and she was sort of raging about the fact that there's a pregnant Barbie and she really grosses out the rest of the Barbies, and so she's only present in the film for about 5 seconds, and therefore Mary Harrington is like, you can't call this a feminist film because you've taken motherhood out of it. So I just love your thoughts on that, on like why it's such a sticky subject. Even within like feminist conversations, we don't really know what to do with motherhood.
Oh yeah, it is so sensitive and complicated, this topic, and there is a self-consciousness that I find in even talking about it, especially to people who aren't mothers, because I'm like, but it's not, it's not amazing, it's not the making of me. It's also really hard, but also I can't really say it's hard because so there's lots of complexity about it, and there has been lots of kind of, I guess, change throughout the kind of feminist movement in recent decades, where probably the third wave feminists would have very much have kind of downplayed the place of mothers. It was all about being more than mothers, or being just like men. And I think kind of in recent years there has been a recognition that actually, yes, feminism got women so far. I can run an organization, but it didn't get rid of lots of the other bits of my life. So women are very tired. So there's lots of kind of complexities in terms of how we see the place of mothers. There is also something about it. I write a lot in the book about basic expectation versus reality. Before I became a mother, I thought it would be boring. I thought, the maternal is kind of dowdy, non-intellectual, and I thought on maternity leave that I would write a book on my first maternity leave. Then became a mum. I was like, oh no, I actually can't. but there's lots. It's much more interesting, both in terms of the highs and the lows of it. It taught me a lot about what it is to be human. But I had this very probably negative, with some kind of pink ideas about what motherhood was before I became a mother.
It is an interesting one, because I like you, Belle, have sort of sensed that tension that there exists within the feminist sort of movement, because I think, as you say, it's often been seen as don't give up your career, your prospects and so on necessarily, and the idea of being a mother being a kind of full-time role and important in itself is somehow looked down upon. But I think, is it just that we need to reorient what we mean by motherhood and being a mother, that it shouldn't be seen as this somehow, I don't know, giving up on something? It's rather giving yourself to something that is actually just as important as potentially a career or any other sort of position in society.
I think in all things there just needs to be a variety of depictions, discussions. I don't think when one becomes a mother they become one thing, and that's what I'm trying to kind of say in the book. It's not that you need to conform to this one box of what it is to be a mother, nor do you have to give up your career, but also recognize that doing both is really, really hard, and not looking down on those who choose to do one thing, which is also hard. It's not easier to stay at home. I think it sounds much harder.
I've read something interesting. I was reading a sort of volume of letters by C.S. Lewis, and he wrote something interesting, I think, to a woman in the 1950s that he was corresponding with. And she was struggling with this whole thing of, am I sort of somehow less if I devote my life to being a mother and bringing up my children and so on. And he basically said, well, the thing is, all of those other things people do, they doctors or engineers or whatever it might be, they're all actually in service of us being able to bring people into the world and give them a flourishing life. So they're all actually for that purpose. Actually, what you're doing is the pinnacle of all these other things, which are actually just to serve human flourishing and bringing people in, into the world in that way. I thought that was, I don't know what you think of that sort of as a way of thinking about sort of.
Yeah, well, I think that's one of the reasons why it's so infuriating, the downplaying of motherhood and the kind of looking down on it, because literally the future of humanity depends on mothers having children, parents having children. So actually, why don't we think more about that? Simple things like you can book your bike onto a train, but you can't book your buggy onto a train. Society is structured in a way that makes, that I found that I felt out of place out in the world as a mother, rather than the society being a place that welcomed and valued mothers. So I think that idea and recognition that, yes, this is actually about the future and what makes us human, what the society is that we are hoping to build together, I think it absolutely needs to be valued, while also not saying that if you're not a mother, then you're less in some way.
What really fascinated me about myself when reading your book, so I'm not a mother yet, and so I think I thought I was coming at it in just a very academic, this is a topic kind of way, and then as I was reading your book, I think what I noticed about myself is, this isn't a neutral topic for me, because even the fact that I'm not a mother has some kind of emotional hold over me, in that even that's my identity, that I'm not one yet. Or, and you write an amazingly relatable line in the book where you was talking about the successes you were accruing in your life before you had your children, and but still there was a part of you that felt like those were the things that you were just filling the gap with until you had your children, and how other people made you feel that way, but also how there's just something within us that feels that way. And so I was quite interested, and it made me ask this question of, is motherhood ever a neutral topic for women? Can we ever actually come at it completely academically, do you think?
I think not. I was thinking, can fathers come at fatherhood academically? Probably not, because we're talking about very human things, and you're almost forced into a position based on your own human experience. I think there is, we're starting some research at Theos about motherhood, and it's almost this is an academic pursuit, but even in the discussions that I have with the researchers about it, we always bring in our personal experience. And I think there's something in that about, that's also about what it is to be a woman. Anyway, it feels like, speak for myself, I feel like I just have to talk about personal things. When I write, I always start with the personal. And I think there's much more maybe pressure on women to do that as ways into even academic subjects. But I don't think it is neutral, or it can be. And I absolutely recognise that feeling of, in the church tradition that I grew up in, I got married when I was 30, which was obviously ancient.
Yeah.
So some of my friends got married 10 years before. So I loved cuddling their babies. I wanted to have their lives. And I think that's part of what the expectation versus the reality. I thought when I then became a mother, that everything would be, I would have everything then. But actually no one warned you about all of the other things that come with it. I also think that women are pitted against each other in lots of different ways, and motherhood is one of those ways in which I feel like people often need to say, well, I'm not a mother, or I am a mother, or I'm finding myself feeling self-conscious when I say I am a mother, because I think that comes with certain ideas about who I am and what my interest would be. But I think in all things we just have to understand the variety of human experiences, and all of the things that we bring to these conversations.
I feel like there's been this interesting thing happening as well in the culture. Things so often just go in pendulum swings, don't they? But against the sort of downplaying of motherhood, you've then had the growth of this quote unquote trad wife movement, which I have a feeling is largely just a kind of TikTok phenomenon. But it's what is that? Because I know you've written on it. And what are your thoughts on this quote unquote trad wife movement?
Oh, I find it so fascinating. So the trad wife phenomenon is very much a social media thing. Yeah. It's into Instagram and TikTok, where you get these influencers, obviously often with millions of followers, and they're often young women, young beautiful women, who share videos and reels and posts, basically portraying their idyllic life. Sometimes on a farm, they milk their own cows, they make their own jam, their hair is perfectly flowing in the wind. And it is this nostalgic harking back to this period when life was apparently perfect for women, and maybe in the 50s or maybe earlier than that. And often these women have multi-million-pound businesses behind their jam or whatever it is, or their posts. I think I've realised that it does ick me out, but I totally get it. I totally get...
You understand the appeal?
Yeah, I totally understand the appeal, because aesthetic beauty in the midst of global turmoil and turbulence and conflict, I feel like it provides an escape from those things. And there's been alongside the kind of fear of the future, a fear of war, a fear of economic uncertainty, there's been kind of like a move towards like hyper-localization. We're kind of retreating closer and closer to our homes, and there's nothing more local than your own kitchen or your own house. I think it's a very human response. Most of these trad wives are white women, but there are also kind of various different strands, including black trad wives. And I found there was something interesting that I think I wrote in the book about black trad wives who are like, why would I go to work or go outside my house and face racism and oppression and be tired when I can actually be looked after by a rich man and make jam?
Wow.
Like, I totally get why people are attracted to that. But again, it is a modern version of these Renaissance images of Mary and perfection and aesthetic beauty. On TikTok.
I mean, I was following just on one account on X of this quote unquote trad wife sort of thing, and there was just an interesting backstory to it where it unraveled, and it turned out this person was not who they claimed to be at all. It was a persona, and their actual life was very different. So I just get the feeling a lot of this stuff is made for social media, and the reality of it is always not what you're seeing on the surface, isn't it?
And these are extreme versions of me on Instagram.
Right.
And when I'm posting photos of my kids are looking adorable. You're never seeing the messy corner of my house. It's kind of
that's carefully kept out of the camera.
Yeah,
lens,
we're all playing into these ideas of perfection. And I have to challenge myself about that, because what are the stories that I am telling about what it is to be a mother on Instagram that might make other people feel bad, inadequate, less than in some way, but also not wanting to hide the joys of motherhood. It's not all bad. It's also really beautiful and funny and joyous. Texture. It's all about texture.
Texture. I like that. You've said, so as someone who doesn't have children yet, to hear you call motherhood your most profound altering and your making and unmaking, part of me that intrigues me, because and then part of me I'm like, I don't know if I want to be altered. Those are my more prideful moments. I'd just love you to break open what you mean by those things a little bit.
Yeah, I guess I'd firstly say that when I say motherhood was my most profound altering, I think it's in a section where I'm basically trying to say towards the end of the book, actually, this isn't just about motherhood. This is about all of us. And what I was trying to say there was there are all sorts of ways in which people can be profoundly changed. For me, it was having my children that unmade me. And yes, it is terrifying, but I feel like I wish I'd heard that more before I became a mother. I do wonder about whether we're kind of saying too much about that because there's all sorts of stories coming out about how younger generations don't want to have children. There was a TikTok list that was done famously a couple of years ago, which had hundreds of reasons why you should not have children, versus like a few being, including they're cute. And I feel like the avalanche of real motherhood stories, particularly post-pandemic, is almost kind of scaring people too much. And so that's why I need to talk about the pain, but also the joy. But it is profound, the change that I think happened.
Again, this is a subject that sort of quite often gets talked about by more kind of conservative people who are worried about falling birth rates and that sort of thing, and the loss of the kind of family unit and everything else. I mean, does any of that sort of worry? Do you feel like it's because being a mother is being cast in more negative light in our culture, that people are putting it off or not doing it altogether? I've even heard of the sort of the Antinatalist movement, which is literally a philosophical movement where they want to stop anyone having children so that humans can die out altogether, because they think that's probably best for everyone, kind of thing.
Bleak.
Which is a kind of, it's bleak, but it's there. There are people who believe that.
Giver-upper attitude that.
Yeah.
Oh, I remember when I had my first son, literally within a few minutes of him being born, I kind of said, I'm so sorry about Trump. That's what I said, because it's 2017, and I just thought, I brought my child into this. Like, this is not how I entered the world. And so I can understand that kind of fear about the future and why you might think, well, why would I create life in this? Will the world exist? But I think there is J.D. Vance and his talking about how actually parents are more invested in the future. Not sure about that, but I think that what we can all do is try and think about all children and the future for all of us as the human race, not just our own particular children. I do worry about the falling birth rates, but that is a very Western phenomenon. Although kind of developing countries are also kind of declining. They're just kind of declining in terms of declining birth rates at a slower rate. In some ways, maybe it's good for there to be fewer people on the planet, but I think that there is a joy in having children and being invested in the future and thinking about how having children develops you as a person. Obviously, not everyone who has children feels that and acts like that, but I do slightly worry about
there are
the
some
future.
governments who are taking quite a proactive approach and kind of incentivizing having children. I mean, do you think that's a good way to go?
I think it's an interesting way to go, and I guess maybe I do agree that there need to be some incentives, because yes, people might be put off from having children because of the negative stories that women are telling about having children. But it's not just that. It is economic instability. It is climate catastrophe. It's lots of other things that make this a less enticing prospect for people. So if governments or states can do something about all of that stuff that makes us all feel better about the future, then birth rates will increase. Also, there's the cost of having children. £2,000 a month for nursery.
Wow.
That's ridiculous. So what are the ways in which we can encourage and help and support families to be able to have more children?
Ooh, this leads us on perfectly to your podcast. A 4-part sort of docu-series called Motherhood versus the Machine, created by you and Theos, and co-hosted with Madeleine Pennington, who herself was heavily pregnant while doing this.
Yes.
Which is just the loveliest, most embodied thing. So it's so great. I'm 3 episodes in, so I've got 1 episode to go. The first obvious question, motherhood versus the machine. What do you mean by the machine? As in, is it a Paul Kingsnorthy type machine, or are you talking literally the washing machine, or both?
Oh, we're talking about the washing machine.
Great.
We are talking about motherhood as a way into exploring all of the kind of technological advancements that are that we are in the midst of. So at Theos, we were doing some particular research projects on death, work, and productivity. And as we were discussing all these things, me and Maddie in particular kept on thinking, I think motherhood could tell an interesting story about all of those things. And the AI and all the machines that are in our future, what will those machines do for us? Will they help us or will they hinder us, particularly as mothers? So there have always been technological advancements that have helped mothers. So if you go back to millennia, you would have found, for example, nipple shields made out of animal skins. Women have always sought help from technology in their kind of maternal experience. But I think there are some really profound changes that are potentially in our future. For example, artificial wombs, which not a lot of people know about, which is this idea that you could, the scientists are working on, that you could grow fetuses outside the womb. And there's kind of
raises all kinds of questions.
Raises all kinds of questions, because I guess the feminist decades ago, feminist ideal would be like, well, great, that completely liberates women.
I can keep going to work and I don't have to take,
Yeah. And maybe it provides more equality in heterosexual relationships where it's both the man and the woman who are invested in this kind of thing that is outside either of their bodies. But would we therefore lose something? There is something more than the physical that is happening, I believe, as a Christian, when someone is pregnant or when someone becomes a mother. It's not just about pregnancy and birthing. There is, the early years of parenting and beyond are very kind of embodied, tactile experiences.
It feels quite transhumanist in its way, sort of Brave New World kind of way of thinking about continuing the human species, as it were. Almost a kind of, Elon Musk, is quite a natalist in the sense that he is all in favor of people having babies, but I think he's not too bothered about exactly how that happens. I think he'd be quite happy with growing babies in external wombs or something.
I think he would
in space.
So yeah,
Why not?
So yeah, I appreciate it's a conflict, isn't it?
Yeah, and there is an ick about it.
Yeah.
So what is that ick? Like,
that's
why do people have in 2025? We did some polling about this with YouGov about the public's responses to the potential of artificial wombs. Most people are like, oh no, and in a kind of apparently post-Christian society or post-religious one, what is it that is making people feel that? In reality, do people think actually we are more than just bodies, that we are also spiritual beings? So the podcast explores basically motherhood versus those technological advancements through topics like work, feeding, death. So we're exploring those two things and whether one wins and one loses.
Yeah, the episode that really struck me was episode 1, where it's specifically about motherhood as a form of work. And so there are a few things that I found really interesting. You focus on the Industrial Revolution lots has happened since to keep pushing this forward, but as quite a catalytic moment where motherhood happened here, it happened in the home, it was unseen, it was done like women doing it on their own, and then work was happening elsewhere. I found that fascinating and really ties in with a previous episode we had with Karen Swallow Pryor, where she talks about domesticity in the same way and ties it back to the same period. But I think it was, and forgive me if it wasn't Lucy Jones, but I think it was Lucy Jones who you were interviewing. And she specifically talks about the way motherhood was such a communal endeavor. And I think she talks in quite evolutionary terms. So she was saying that her nervous system has not evolved past needing this to be something that people do with her, alongside her, for her. And I found that so fascinating. And again, when I think about sort of feminist conversations that happen and that, I'm so often a part of this, so individualistic.
Yeah.
And so I was just wondering if there's something you could just break that open a little bit about motherhood and community.
Yeah. Part of why I think motherhood feels so hard in this particular cultural moment is this individualistic approach to being a human, full stop. And I realized in becoming a mother that I realized that as a Nigerian Igbo woman, I felt dislocated from that community. So in my culture, in the Igbo culture, and lots of other countries around the world, we have something called omugwo, which is ideally when I had my first child or any child, my mum would come and live with me for 3 months, and basically I would just lie down and someone would feed me, feed the baby, wash the baby, tidy the house. Sounds amazing. And they have that in China, in Japan, in the kind of South American countries as well. We don't have that same concept in the UK at all. Yeah. And women are really suffering from this kind of isolation and individualism, which is where I think the church has a real opportunity and has always had an opportunity and has always been a place that welcomed new parents in. One of the kind of very practical differences that I realised as someone who was part of a church community and had children was when I talked to my NCT friends who were having children at the same time as me. In the first 2 weeks after we had our child, we were on a meal rota at church, right? So someone, a different person every day, arrived, delivered some food, had a chat, checked we were okay. The rest of them didn't have that. So there's something about the cultural differences, but also the beauty of being part of a faith community that looks out for each other. I don't think we were meant to be doing this alone.
I mean, and I've got to say, I mean, this won't be everyone's experience, but my wife is a church minister, and she's had 3 of our 4 children during her time as a minister, and each time took sort of 6 months off. And that was a really valuable thing. I mean, some people will think, oh, you know, how wasteful, you know, having children and being taken away from your job. But I would say the experience of having children as a church leader was incredibly good for the church. And it also meant the church had to come around as a family and help us to make that happen. And that was good for them. It was good for us. It was good for our children. And there is something about kind of just being a family of the church, and that can be a really positive thing for families, for mothers, for everyone.
Yeah, it's so beautiful. And I think even if it was just for that alone, I think people should be part of church communities. And we're trying to explore in the research we're doing at Theos, becoming a parent is there's an existential change that happens. People start to ask questions about themselves, about whether there's a God, what does it mean to live the good life, and it's at that moment that I think the church can be like, hey, you know, we've got some answers to that. And it's also at that point where some people do start to enter church buildings.
Oh, for sure. I mean, that's a classic entry point, isn't it? Having children, suddenly I'm thinking about life completely differently. Maybe I should check out church and that kind of thing.
I think Lucy Jones also writes about the churching of women, which is this ritual in the Book of Common Prayer in the Church of England that has kind of died out, but I think we should bring it back, which is this ritual where 40 days after a woman has given birth, they would come to go through this ritual and blessing by the priest, and it recognises the peril that the woman has gone through in bringing life into the world. And there's nothing like that that happens that is just about the mother. You know, we have the christening is about the baby, but I feel like in, you know, millennial generations and younger, there is a search for meaning, particularly at that point, and I think that the church could provide this kind of blessing.
It sounds
recognition.
almost like what I guess the presentation of Jesus at the temple was about the baby, but I wonder whether there's also a component of it being about Mary, you know, coming and sort of being received. I mean, going back to what you were saying about the communal aspect of this, another story that made me think of course, is when Mary goes to Elizabeth and she's also pregnant, and it is kind of, it's interesting, isn't it, that one of the most profound places where we see 2 women both pregnant in the scriptures is this moment, and that's obviously where the Magnificat happens and everything. It feels like if you've got your eyes open to it, there's lots of stuff there, right, staring you in the face in the Gospels that is reinforcing this idea that this matters.
Yeah, and what's so annoying is these are surprising treasures that I've kind of
you've overlooked
because we've told a very male story of Christianity, and that's like a profoundly prophetically beautiful meeting of 2 power women and 2 power mothers that birthed Jesus and John, and yes, there is that beautiful connection between 2 pregnant women. But immediately, because of what we've spoken about before, which is this kind of self-consciousness about talking about motherhood, I think about infertility and baby loss, and how, yes, Elizabeth had longed for a child and then she had one, but there are no stories of unresolved fertility in the Bible.
Right.
And clearly there is unresolved fertility. There is a lot of pain and heartbreak and facing mortality that happens in this kind of journey that doesn't necessarily end up with having children. So yes, it's kind of these complicated thoughts.
Yeah. One final question, even though it's a reluctant final question, I must say. You at Theos do so much work, but about what makes a human, what makes a person, and actually as a culture, we're asking that all over the place, and we will continue to keep asking that as, you know, parts of us sort of get subcontracted out continually. It seems like motherhood is so central to this discussion of what's it mean to be a human. And so I guess my question is like a two-part. What have you found motherhood brings to wider discussions about humanity, about what it means to be a person? And then just very quickly, but I'm asking you to give me a big answer here. I'm just wondering why it's not more central in all of our conversations about what it means to be a human, why it almost feels like that's the natural first place to go, that one aspect of being a human is that we are able to create more humans, and yet it's just not central. And I'm just quite curious as to why you think that may be. Sorry,
I've got an idea.
Big fat questions.
I think it's only in recent decades, maybe a century or so, that women have held the pen and been able to speak and write about their own experiences as mothers and what this tells us about what it is to be human. But actually, if you go back a much kind of longer period back in history, there has been in human cultures an understanding of the divine being feminine in some way because of this idea of creation.
Yeah, like life gives life.
Life gives life, natality, all of these ideas. So there is a kind of understanding of that bigger concept, I think, when we think about who God is. I think there is still a part of me, when I was writing the book and people would say, oh, what are you writing about? And I'd say motherhood. And I'd just see this kind of like glazing over. Really? And I was like, so I'd always say, oh, but not just about motherhood, because motherhood is like, feels small. And actually it is big.
Yeah.
And even if it's not about ourselves becoming mothers, we were all born of a mother. What does that tell us about what it is to be human? It tells us that we are interconnected, that we are interdependent, that we depend on each other, that being a human isn't about being an individual isolated from other people. We all need each other. And that, you can go lots of places with that. Included assisted dying. What does it mean to live? Does it mean that you have to be able to do everything yourself well? Yeah. What does it mean to work? What does it mean to be part of community? I think motherhood absolutely, which is why I'm so fascinated by this subject, it absolutely does need to take a more central place in kind of our understanding of the world that we live in. And that includes the economy, it includes work, includes productivity, includes technology, it includes how we live well together.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for sharing so candidly from your own experience. Yeah. And the book is Unmaking Mary, Shattering the Myth of Perfect Motherhood. We'll make sure that's linked from today's show. There's also the podcast series, Motherhood versus the Machine. And thank you for coming on, our first returning guest to Re-Enchanting.
Our first sequel. Come back for the trilogy with the next book.
Never again.
2 and we're done. Yeah. Oh no, thank you so much for joining us. And thank you too for joining us. If you would like to find out more, if you would like to read more from Seen and Unseen, touching upon so many of the topics that we've spoken about today, then seenandunseen.com is the place to go. And if you are passionate about making more conversations like this happen, then seenandunseen.com/give is where you can find all of the details to make more re-enchanting happen.
For now, thanks for being with us. Thanks to Chine, and we'll see you next time.